The Varn warship, Absolute Dominion, dropped from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system, and Admiral Kale Vorkin did not look up from his maps. He had done this 114 times. 114 planets, 114 civilizations, every single one had the same moment, that long sick silence when they looked at their own sky and understood what was hanging above their world. Some of them screamed, some of them went very quiet. A few of them fired their weapons, which Vorkin respected in a distant, professional kind of way, the way a surgeon might respect the body's instinct to fight a blade. This planet was called Earth, which was one of the more unimaginative names Vorkin had come across. The species was called humans. They had a history of roughly 400,000 years and a recorded civilization of about 6,000, which was very young by galactic standards, almost infant. Their fastest ships could move at roughly 0.5% of light speed. They had placed a structure on their moon and a small pressurized station on the fourth planet in their system, Rustred rock they called Mars. Their military technology was the standard for a Class 4 world, nuclear weapons which were destructive but which the Dominion shields had handled without difficulty for 200 years. Orbital defense platforms, around 40 of them, a ground-based planetary defense network, all of it impressive in the way a child's drawing of a bridge is impressive. You could see the idea in it, the intention. And that was where the admiration stopped. Vorkin positioned his 600 ships above the planet's northern polar axis and opened the planetary broadcast array. The message would reach every communication receiver on the surface. Within 9 seconds, the Dominion's language system had been quietly studying human broadcasts for 4 years. Every major language, every regional variation worth mapping, the translation would be clean and exact. He composed the message without particular care. He had given this message so many times it lived in his hands more than his mind. He transmitted, then he went back to his resource extraction schedules. The planet had significant mineral deposits in its lower crust. The oceans were biologically productive in ways that would interest the Dominion's catalog teams. 200 years of extraction would be very profitable. After that, the world would be reclassified and left. He did not think about the people on it any further. He was not by nature a cruel being. He had simply never been given a reason to think of the people on Class 4 worlds the way one thinks of people. They were a feature of the landscape, the same as the mineral deposits. He returned to his maps. On Earth, the signal hit every screen at once. It interrupted a football match in Brazil. It broke into a parliamentary session in India. It appeared on a billboard in Times Square and on the cracked phone screen of a farmer checking the weather in rural Kenya. It played on a small television in a Chicago warehouse where a man named Darnell set his work scanner down on a shelf and stared at the screen and did not move for a long time. The message played in 247 languages. It played twice automatically, and then the channel closed. For about 90 seconds, large parts of the internet went almost completely silent. Not because the networks went down. They didn't go down. They went quiet because hundreds of millions of people were staring at screens and not typing, not sharing, not calling anyone, just staring. Then the noise came back, louder than anything the internet had ever carried before. Government channels across the planet lit up simultaneously. Military installations moved too. Emergency protocols that had been quietly updated every year for the last decade based on threat assessments, classified above the level of most generals. Secure bunkers opened in 38 countries. In those same 38 countries, specific phones rang with a specific tone that had never been used in a live situation. And the people who answered received the same 2 sentences. The timeline has activated. Report to your designated station. The UN Emergency Council met 41 minutes later in the bunker beneath UN headquarters in New York. The room had been built specifically for this occasion. Most of the people now sitting in it were seeing it for the first time. There were 15 of them around the table. The room was gray and clean and very cold. One wall held a large screen showing the Varn fleet, 600 ships, arranged with the kind of geometric precision that communicated more clearly than any weapon could that they had done this before many times, and that it had always ended the same way. Secretary General Armada sat at the head of the table and said nothing for the first 11 minutes. She was 53 years old, born in Accra, and she had held this office for 6 years. She was not a soldier. She had never pretended to be, but she had the quality rare in any profession of being completely still under pressure. Not frozen still, the way very deep water is still. She let them talk. General Park Suho from the Korean Unified Defense Command had a tablet in his hands, and he worked through the numbers carefully and honestly, which was the right thing to do, and also the most terrifying thing anyone in the room had ever witnessed. Our orbital platforms can engage, he said. I want to be honest with everyone. Here, it would be symbolic at best. Their shielding absorbs energy at levels our best weapons cannot match. A fully coordinated nuclear strike, every platform firing at once, would not breach a single forward vessel. We have approximately 47 minutes of credible resistance before we are looking at unrestricted orbital bombardment. Then we negotiate, said Minister Farouk. We buy time. The message did not offer negotiation, said Commander Vasquez. Her voice was flat. It offered surrender. There is a meaningful difference between signing a document and genuinely complying, said Dr. Liu Wei, who had spent 30 years studying first contact scenarios and was discovering now that none of his models had included how his hands would feel when it was actually happening. We sign, we create space, we think. What we think about is how to dig our own planet's minerals out of the ground for 200 years while they catalog our ocean, said Commander Vasquez. That is what the next 2 centuries look like if we sign that document. Let's not dress it up. Nobody answered her. Amara had been watching all of them. She had a glass of water on the table. Front of her, she had not touched it. She had in the last 11 minutes glanced at her watch 4 times. Former President Habimana, who had been brought in from Kigali because nobody had wanted to make this decision without him in the room, was watching her. He had noticed the watch. He was wondering what it meant. Secretary General Chen Hong leaned forward. Amara, you haven't said a word. I've been listening, she said. We need more than that right now. She reached into the folder in front of She placed a single sheet of paper. At the center of the table, one number. Printed large. 4,847. The room went quiet. Ships, she said. Nobody moved. She explained it the way she had. Rehearsed it simply and without drama. Because there was already enough drama in the room, and adding more would not help anyone think clearly. 31 years earlier, the Farpoint Observatory Array, a deep space listening project classified several levels above the UN Security Council, had confirmed the existence of the Varn Dominion and its direction of expansion. Earth was in its path. The mathematics gave them 30 to 40 years before contact. 38 nations had begun building in secret. Not a token force, a fleet, every resource that could be quietly redirected had been redirected, every shipwright, weapons physicist, engineer, and military strategist who could be recruited without the general population knowing had been recruited. The construction happened in the deep black past the orbit of Neptune at coordinates outside any standard pre-invasion survey scan that a species doing routine reconnaissance of a class 4 world would think to check. They had built for 31 years. They had built 4,847 ships. The silence in the room was enormous. Why, Minister Farouk said very quietly, were we not told? Because the Dominion has intelligence capabilities we don't fully understand. Amara said, one leak, one wrong conversation, one intercepted message, and they arrive with 10,000 ships instead of 600. And GT snorts. And GT, we needed them to see a Class 4 world. We needed them to be confident about what they were looking at. She paused. We needed them here in our system before we showed them what they had missed. You let them come, Commander Vasquez said. Her voice had something complicated in it, not quite anger. Something that had spent a long time on the dark side of hope and was only now being turned toward the light. We needed them in our system, on our ground inside our range, Amara said. The fleet is positioned at coordinates that their standard survey would never have checked for a Class 4 target. They have not found it. They came here and they looked at 40 orbital platforms and some nuclear weapons, and they made a decision about who we are. She let that settle. They made the wrong decision. How many people know? General Park asked. The crews of 4,847 ships, Amara said. The leaders of 38 nations. The 3 secretaries general who held this chair before me. And now us, Chin Hong said. And now you, Amara agreed, which is why I am asking for decision. She laid it out clearly. The council could send the surrender communication by time, stall the process, keep the Varn focused on paperwork and logistics while the fleet made its approach. Or the council could authorize the fleet to move now, full speed, no pretense. The debate took 4 hours. It ended 11-4 in favor of the surrender communication. Amara voted with the minority. She listened to the final count without expression. She thanked the council for their work. She walked out. She went down the corridor through 2 security doors into a small room with a single terminal and a single chair. The terminal connected through 7 encrypted relays to a receiver that had been in solar orbit at a distance of 2 astronomical units for the last 9 years. There were no markings on the terminal, nothing to indicate what it was for. Everyone who had known had either been told to forget it or had been careful never to ask. She sat down. She thought briefly about the weight of a thing this large finally arriving, not about strategy, just about the weight of it, the way a door feels when it opens, and you know you will never close it again. Then she typed one word. Begin. She sat in the quiet of the room after. She sent it, the air recycler hummed. The room smelled of plastic and cold metal. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and went back to help the council draft the formal surrender communication to the Varn Dominion. Vorkin received Earth surrender 17 hours later. He read it, signed the acknowledgement, transmitted the standard response regarding the labor auxiliary transition timeline. He set down his stylus and allowed himself a moment of profession. Boredom. They always surrendered. 114 out of 114. It was almost too predictable to feel satisfying. His navigation officer spoke. Admiral, there is a ghost signal on the long-range array bearing approximately 42 degrees off the ecliptic. Origin point is deep space. Coordinates show nothing on any survey. Vorkin looked at the display. The signal was faint, almost nothing. Drive wake. Interference from their FTL entry could produce readings like this, so could diffracted starlight under certain conditions. There was nothing at those coordinates. The pre-invasion survey had confirmed empty space. How long did it last? It appeared briefly and stopped. Log it, keep monitoring. If it repeats, I want to know. He looked at the signal for 3 more seconds, then he looked away. There was nothing out there. Class 4 worlds did not hide things in deep space. They barely had the technology to reach the edge of their own solar system. Whatever the ghost signal was, it was a sensor artifact. It was nothing. He went to sleep. In the deep black at coordinates, Vorn's survey drone had passed without slowing. The lights came on. 1 ship, then 10, then 50, then 300, then 800, then 1,500, then 3,000, and the number kept climbing ship after ship, waking from standby to full operational, running lights blinking on in the darkness like a field of cold stars, learning they were allowed to be seen. 4,847 human ships, built from 3 decades of fear and stubbornness and the very human refusal to face the end of everything without first throwing everything they had at it. On the bridge of the fleet's flagship, hull designation ESF-001. No name painted on its hull, unnamed all these years, because naming it made it real, and making it real before the time was right had been a risk they could not take. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak read Amara's one word on his terminal. He stood. He looked at his crew, men and women and people who had trained for this moment for most of their adult lives. Some of them had parents who had trained for it before them, children of the program, every one of them carrying 31 years of preparation in their bones. All ships acknowledge, Admiral Mubarak said. His voice was steady. We move in 12 hours. He looked at the distant light of humanity's sun, small and yellow and very far away. We're coming, he said quietly. To no one in particular. To everyone. The fleet turned toward home. The first Varn assessment teams landed 18 hours after the surrender. Communication was sent. They came down in perfectly clean drop shuttles, white, featureless, silent. Their descent. They landed in open fields outside major cities and airport grounds in the cleared spaces of military bases whose personnel had been ordered to stand down and not to make eye contact. The teams that stepped out were not soldiers. They wore gray uniforms with Dominion insignia, and they carried cataloging equipment and portable survey arrays. They were, in the language of their orders, resource evaluation technicians. They walked up to the edges of the cities they had been assigned to assess, and they began to take measurements. The people of those cities watched from windows and street corners and rooftops. Some of them watched in silence. Some of them had their phones up streaming to the world. A few of them in Lagos, in Lahore, in Sao Paulo, in Melbourne, stepped forward and blocked the paths of the teams. This happened in 12 cities in the first 2 hours. The VAR and assessment teams were equipped for it. They carried devices that produced a short-range sonic pulse that caused disorientation and non-damaging collapse in most carbon-based bipedal species. The crowds fell. The teams stepped around the fallen people carefully, without any particular emotion, the way someone might step around a puddle, and continued their assessment work. The people got back up. They blocked the teams again. They fell again. They got up again. In the city of Lahore, this process repeated 9 times before the assessment team leader filed a formal delay report with the absolute Dominion. In his report, he noted that the local population showed an unusual resistance to deterrence conditioning and requested additional security personnel. Vorkin read the report inside. There was always a faction on every world. Without exception, some portion of the population could not accept what their leadership had signed. It always resolved itself within a few weeks. He approved the additional security request and moved on to the extraction timeline documents. On the 41st floor of the UN building, the real one, not the bunker, Amara Os, sat across a glass table from VARN Overseer Teth, who was the Dominion's official transition administrator for Earth. Teth was tall and thin and very still, in the way of someone who has never needed to move quickly because everything has always moved out of his way. His skin was a deep gray blue. His eyes were large and pale and light in ways that were slightly different from human eyes. He saw into the low infrared range, which meant he could see body heat, which meant he could see the blood moving under Amara's skin, even when her face was completely neutral. He used this to his advantage. He always knew when humans were nervous. He could not read Amara at all. The transition documentation you have submitted is incomplete, Teth said. His voice came through a translation device clipped to his collar. The sound that emerged was smooth, almost pleasant. We are missing the regional governance structures surveys for 43 provinces, the industrial capacity assessments for 17 coastal zones, and the population census confirmations for. I understand, Amara said. We are working to complete those submissions. The bureaucratic infrastructure of a planet with 8 billion people and 195 sovereign nations requires coordination. Time. I hope the Dominion can appreciate the logistical complexity. The Dominion has processed transition for civilizations of similar complexity in less time. We are doing our best to move efficiently, Amara said. I also wanted to raise the question of humanitarian provisions during the transition period, specifically the matter of civilian access to food distribution networks. Our models suggest that the presence of assessment teams in agricultural zones is creating supply chain disruption. Teth held up a hand. Overseer Asai, he said, and he used the title wrong, and Amara did not correct him. You are aware that the Dominion's patience for procedural delay is not unlimited. Of course, Amara said, I am not attempting to create delay. I am attempting to ensure a smooth transition that serves the interests of both parties. An unstable civilian population during the extraction setup phase would be counterproductive for the Dominions. Owned. We will stabilize the civilian population, Teth said. That is not your concern. I understand, Amara said. I will have the remaining documentation submitted within 24 hours, Teth said. We will do everything we can, Amara said. Teth looked at her with his pale, heat-treating eyes. He could see her blood moving through the vessels in her face, calm and steady. Every reading. He had never met a human whose body read this still. He found it, in a way he could not quite place, unsettling. He closed the meeting. Amara walked back to her office, sat down, and allowed herself 45 seconds of complete stillness. Then she picked up the documentation files she had been incompletely submitting for the last 18 hours and began introducing 7 new procedural errors into the governance survey forms. She checked her clock. 8 hours and 22 minutes. The city was called Resistencia. It was a mid-sized city in northern Argentina, and it had not, despite its name, been chosen for what happened there for any poetic reason. It had been chosen because it contained a military base and the base's commanding officer, a general named Marcos Reen, who had 3 daughters and a long career of doing what he was told, and had decided in the last 48 hours that he was done with that, had refused to stand his people down. He had locked the base. He had put his on the walls. When the VARN assessment team came, he had spoken to them over a loudspeaker and told them to leave. They had filed a report. The report went up through TEF's administrative structure and landed on Vorkin's desk, and Vorkin read it and made a decision in about 12 seconds. He selected 3 ships from the orbital formation and gave them targeting coordinates. The bombardment lasted 9 minutes. The base was destroyed. 3 blocks of the city around it were also destroyed, which was not intentional but also was not something anyone filed a report. About 412 people died. Many more were injured. The rest of the city fled. The message was clear. The Dominion made sure its translation array broadcast an explanation of what had just happened to every screen in Argentina and to a significant portion of South America. Non-compliance with transition protocols has consequences. We encourage cooperation. In the UN bunker, the council watched it happen on the screen. The room was completely quiet when it ended. 3 of the members who had voted for the surrender strategy were no longer looking at the screen. They were looking at the table. One of them, a minister from Central Europe, whose name the history books would later not remember kindly, said in a very quiet voice that perhaps the council should consider advising the remaining military installations to genuinely stand down. We sign the document, he said. If we are going to sign it, we should. Commander Vasquez turned to look at him with an expression that ended his sentence before he finished it. Amara had not looked away from the screen. She was watching the smoke rising over Resistencia. She let herself feel it, the weight of 412 people she had not been able to prevent, and she felt it fully because she thought it was important not to insulate herself from the real cost of the strategy she had chosen. Then she filed it somewhere deep and returned to the work in front of her. She checked her clock. 6 hours and 40 minutes. On ESF-1, Admiral Mubarak received the report about Resistencia while he was standing at the main tactical display reviewing formation spacing for the approach. His comms officer handed him the data pad. He read it. He read the casualty number. He set the pad down on the console. His bridge crew watched him without watching him. The peripheral monitoring that crews do when they want to know how their commander is processing something without being seen to look. Mubarak stared at the tactical display for a moment, at the lines of ships behind and around him, at the distance left between the fleet and the edge of the solar system. 6 hours, he said, not to anyone specifically, just to the air. He went back to reviewing the formation spacing. The fleet was running dark, minimal emission drives at 30% capacity, no active sensor broadcast at this distance from the sun. Passive scanning would not pick them up. They looked too. Any sensor pointed their way like space, like nothing. The ships moved in silence. Inside them, 4,847 crews ran their final preparation checklists. Weapons officers ran targeting calibrations. Engineers confirmed drive readiness and checked hull integrity for the 30th time. Medical bays staged their supplies and said nothing to each other because there was nothing useful to say. Some of the crew members slept, not many but some. The ones who had been doing this long enough to know that sleep before a battle was a professional discipline, not a luxury. Some of them wrote messages. They asked their commanding officers to hold and only deliver if things went wrong. Some of them just sat and looked at the bulkheads of their ships and thought about the world on the other side of all this. Commander Alana, rays of the destroyer Sao Paulo, a ship named for a city that was still standing, which she chose to take as a good sign, gathered her crew in the main bay at the 4-hour mark and spoke to them for about 3 minutes. She was not a naturally dramatic person. She said that they had trained for this for a long time and that the training had been good and that she trusted every person in the room. She said that the mission was to go home, engage the fleet in orbit, and make it clear to the Varn Dominion that they had made a very serious miscalculation about this planet and this species. Then she said, when this is over, I'm buying the first round, every single one of you. Somebody in the back laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes when tension finds the only exit it can find. Alana returned to the bridge. Back on Earth, the council was fracturing. The minister who had spoken after the Resistencia footage was now not alone. A second vote was being pushed, not for full compliance but for issuing a statement calling on remaining military installations to stand down voluntarily to reduce the risk of further bombardment. 3 members were supporting it. Amara blocked it procedurally. She used a council charter clause about emergency authority during ongoing threat assessment that no one had ever needed to use before. The minister looked at her across the table. How long are you planning to drag this out? As long as it needs to be dragged out, she said. People are dying. I know. Then, 412 people died in Resistencia, she said. I know every one of those deaths is real. And I am not asking you to think otherwise, but I am asking you to trust the math. Sit down. He sat. He was angry. He would remain angry for a long time. Amara checked the clock. 3 hours and 11 minutes. She picked up the next stack of incomplete documentation forms and began to prepare her next meeting with Teth. In orbit, Vorkin was eating when his sensor officer's voice came through the bridge comm. Admiral, the ghost signal has returned. He put down his meal. Origin. Same bearing, 42 degrees off the ecliptic, but Admiral, it's stronger this time. Significantly stronger. Vorkin walked to the bridge. He looked at the sensor readout himself. It was stronger, much stronger. Not 1 signal, not 10. The array was trying to process a number and having difficulty resolving it cleanly. What am I looking at? He said. I'm not certain, his officer said, and there was something in the officer's voice that Vorkin had not heard in a very long time. Uncertainty. Give me the best number you have, Vorkin said. The officer looked at the display. Current contact estimate, and this may be a sensor error, Admiral. Current estimate is above 400, possibly higher. They're still resolving. Vorkin stared at the screen. He tried to think of what could produce 400 contacts in deep space coordinates that a pre-invasion survey had flagged as empty. Equipment malfunction. FTL, residue diffraction on a large scale, some kind of coordinated asteroid formation. He tried to think of anything that made sense. Wake the fleet, he said. All ships to combat readiness. Then he opened a channel to his weapons officer and said, target the orbital platforms first. If something is coming, I do not want threats above and below. Simultaneously. He had been doing this 114 times. There had never been a 115th scenario. Until now, the number on Vorkin's sensor display kept climbing. At first it had been 400, then the resolution improved and it became 700. Then 1200, then the array's contact sorting system, which had been designed for battlefield management and could track up to 3,000 individual vessels simultaneously, ran into the edges of its own capacity and produced a number that Vorkin read twice because he was certain there was a formatting error. There was no formatting error. 4,847. Contact, classification, artificial vessel, drive signature analysis. Incomplete, weapon signature analysis. Incomplete, species of origin analysis. Ongoing. Vorkin stood very still at the sensor console. He had a fleet of 600 ships. He was looking at nearly 5,000. His first officer, Commander Ashan, stepped up beside him and looked at the same display. There was a pause. Admiral Ashan said, I see it, Vorkin said. Should I get me weapon classifications as soon as the analysis resolves, Vorkin said, and tell me the moment any of those contacts change bearing. He went to his command chair and sat down. He pulled up the pre-invasion survey of this system on his secondary display. He looked at the coordinates. where those contacts were now appearing. He looked at the survey data for those same coordinates. The survey had marked them empty. Confirmed empty, in fact, a drone pass with full sensor sweep conducted 14 months ago had returned nothing. He looked at the survey date, then he looked at the current date. 14 months. Whatever was out there had not been there 14 months ago, or it had been there and they had not looked hard enough. He chose not to dwell on which answer was correct. It didn't change the situation in front of him. All ships combat formation Delta, he said. Weapons hot. I want our shields at full capacity and I want them there in the next 3 minutes. His bridge ran to their stations without a word. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak watched the edge of the solar system approach on his forward display and felt for the first time in a very long time something that was close to peace. Not because the danger was small. The danger was enormous. He was bringing 4,847 ships against a Varn fleet that had spent centuries perfecting the business of orbital assault and resource seizure. The Dominion had done this 114 times. They were professional in the way that only repetition produces. But Mubarak had been training for this specific engagement for his entire professional career. He had studied every Vorn battle record that human intelligence had been able to obtain in 31 years of covert research. He knew how they formed. He knew how they communicated. He knew that they were excellent at fighting the way they had always fought and that they had never needed to be anything else. He was about to give them a reason to need something else. Active sensors, he said. Full broadcast all ships. His sensor officer looked up. Admiral, that will confirm our position too. I know, Mubarak said. Do it. The fleet lit up. Every ship in the formation switched from passive running to full active sensor broadcast simultaneously. Every drive went to full power. Every weapon system moved to hot standby. The darkness they had been hiding in for 31 years fell away in a single second, and 4,847 human warships announced their existence to every scanner within 2 light hours. Open all frequencies, Mubarak said. His comms officer opened the channel. Mubarak leaned forward slightly. This is Admiral Yusuf Mubarak of the Earth Strategic Fleet 1st Armada, he said. We are transmitting on all open frequencies to the Vorn Dominion fleet currently in orbit above Earth. This is a formal communication from the government and people of the planet Earth. You have 48 hours to withdraw your fleet from our solar system. Take your ships, take your personnel, leave our space. This offer will not be repeated, and it will not be negotiated. That is all. He sat back. His bridge crew waited. The channel crackled, then a voice came through, translated smooth, controlled. This is Admiral Kale Vorkin of the Varn Dominion. Identify your origin. You are operating in a formally surrendered territory under Dominion authority. Stand down your vessels immediately and explain the nature of your fleet. You have 60 seconds to comply before I classify this as a hostile action. Mubarak nodded to his comms officer, who kept the channel open. Admiral Vorkin, Mubarak said. Earth did not surrender. Earth stalled. Those are two different things. As for the nature of this fleet, it's ours. We built it. A pause on the other end. That is not possible, Vorkin said. And yet, Mubarak said, Another pause, longer this time. You do not have this technology. Vorkin said, your species. Developmental level. Our developmental level was assessed based on what we chose to show you. Mubarak said, we've had 31 years to prepare for this conversation. We used that time differently than you expected. He paused. I want to be honest with you, Admiral. We did not build this fleet to conquer territory. We are not an expansionist species. We built this fleet to make sure that no one could ever do to us what you were planning to do today. We built it to make sure that the next time a Dominion ship drops out of faster than light travel at the edge of our system, the officer on that bridge has a reason to reconsider. You cannot win this engagement, Vorkin said, even with the numbers you are showing the Dominion's combat superiority. Admiral Mubarak said, with respect, you've been doing this for 114 planets. He paused. None of those planets were us. He nodded to his comms officer. Channel closed. He stood. All ships advance, he said. Execute. Attack formation Prometheus. Weapons free upon entering engagement range. Let's go home. The moment the channel closed, Vorkin made 3 decisions very quickly. He redirected 40 ships from the resource perimeter to reinforce his forward line. He tasked his communications officer with sending an emergency signal to the nearest Dominion sector command, a fleet. Request full priority, whatever could be scrambled, and he sent a targeting order to his weapons division. The human fleet was to be classified as a hostile, irregular force and engaged without the standard warning protocols. He had never given that order on a Class 4 world before. He gave it now. The first exchange happened at the edge of Earth's orbital plane, and it did not go the way Vorkin had planned. His front line opened with standard Dominion heavy beam weapons, energy lance cannons that could punch through the shields of most species vessels in 2 to 3 sustained hits. They were his first choice weapon in every engagement he had run. They were reliable, they were proven, they had never failed him. The beams hit the leading human ships. The shields held. Not completely. The ships in the first wave took damage, 2 of them venting atmosphere from hull breaches, but the shields held far longer than any Class 4 civilization shielding technology should have held. The human ships continued advancing. Then the human fleet returned fire, and Vorkin understood, in a sudden cold way, that he had been working from completely wrong information. The weapons the human fleet carried were not the weapons of a Class 4 civilization. They were something else, something built from a combination of human engineering principles and 30 years of reverse engineering every piece of Vorn technology that human intelligence had been able to get its hands on. Energy signatures that the Dominion's own scanners had trouble categorizing. Kinetic delivery systems married to directed energy payloads in configurations that the Dominion's clear's throat defensive architecture had not been designed to handle, because no one had ever needed to handle them before. In the first 4 minutes of the engagement, Vorkin lost 11 ships. He had never lost 11 ships in the first 4 minutes of anything. He lost them not to a single devastating weapon. He lost them to overlapping coordinated fire from multiple angles simultaneously. The human fleet spreading across his Formation like water finding gaps, targeting the junctions between his shield projectors, the spaces between his ships where coverage overlapped. Weekly, they had studied his formation geometry. Of course they had, 31 years they had. Studied everything. Vorkin began to adapt. He pushed the center of his formation back and widened. The wings breaking the geometric spacing the humans were exploiting. The losses slowed. But they did not stop. On ESF-1, Mubarak watched the engagement data scroll across his tactical display. His fleet was taking damage. The Dominion's weapons were better in raw individual power than anything human built. When a Dominion beam weapon found a gap in a human shield, it found it catastrophically. The Eastern Star, a heavy cruiser 3, rose back in the formation, had taken 2 hits in rapid succession, and its reactor was venting. He watched the damage report update. He watched the evacuation count start. He made himself look at it, then he looked at the broader tactical picture. The Varn were reorganizing. Vorkin was good, adapting faster than Mubarak had expected. The initial configuration exploit was closing. He would need to move to the second phase. Phase 2, he said to his tactical officer, initiate the flanking sweep. All wing elements, and tell Commander Reyes to take her squadron around the far side of the moon. I want them coming up from the south when the main formation hits from the north. His tactical officer relayed the orders. On the display, hundreds of ship markers began to shift. This was the part of the plan that the Dominion would not understand, not because it was especially complex, because it was the kind of plan that only made sense if you were willing to accept a certain kind of casualty. The flanking sweep required ships to move through a zone of concentrated Varn fire to reach their positions. Ships would be lost. The commanders of those ships knew it. They had volunteered for the sweep position specifically because they understood the math and had chosen to be part of the math. Vorkin would not calculate for that. His models did not include a species that willingly accepted casualties in exchange for positional advantage. With this degree of consistency, his experience told him that species, when they started losing ships, lost momentum. They fell back. They reassessed. What his experience had never told him, because he had never needed to know, was that there were species who took the casualties and kept coming. Down on Earth's surface, the sky was no longer what it had been. The orbital battle was visible to the naked eye in the hours around dawn and dusk, bright streaks of light silent at this distance, moving too fast and too purposefully to be anything natural. People stood in streets and fields and on rooftops and watched. They didn't know the details of what was happening. They didn't know the fleet was called the First Armada, or that Admiral Mubarak had spent 30 years preparing for this day, or that the woman who had built this plan was sitting in a bunker 7 floors below street level, watching the same thing they were watching. They knew that something was fighting for them up there. They watched. In the bunker, the council had stopped arguing. There was nothing to argue about anymore. The fleet was engaged. The plan was in motion. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen, and no vote around a table was going to change its direction. Amara sat at the head of the table and watched the tactical feed from the fleet. She was very still. She had the glass of water in front of her again. Still untouched, Chen Hong sat beside her. After a while, he said, "How long have you been carrying this?" She thought about it. "Since the day I took the oath," she said. "The outgoing Secretary General told me on the same day, sat me down in a room just like the one where I sent the signal, showed me the program files, the ship counts, the projected readiness, dates." She paused. She said, "This is either the thing that saves us or the thing that proves we were never going to be saved. There is no third option. And you believed it would work." "I believed we had earned the right to try," Amara said. "That is different from believing it would work." She looked at the tactical display, at the thousands of ships moving across it, at the damage reports, at the casualty figures climbing slowly on the right side of the screen, at the Vorn fleet still formidable, still fighting, still certain, even now, that this would eventually end the way it always ended. Outside in the dark above the world, her people were showing them otherwise. By the 14th hour of the engagement, Vorkin had lost 61 ships. He had never in his career lost 61 ships. He had won engagements against species that had more ships than he had. He had won engagements where his enemy had better weapons at the individual unit level. He had won engagements where the terrain and positioning had not favored him. He was, by any standard the Dominion used to measure these things, an excellent combat commander. What he was not was prepared for an enemy that fought the way the humans fought. The problem was not their numbers. Though the numbers were a problem, the problem was not their technology, though their technology had been consistently better than the pre-invasion assessment had suggested. The problem was that every model Vorkin used to predict enemy behavior was built on a common assumption that an opponent, upon reaching a certain casualty threshold, would begin to prioritize survival, would consolidate, would pull back to regroup. The humans had crossed what should have been that threshold in the 6th hour. They had not pulled back. They had accelerated. The tactic that cost Vorkin the most ships was one his tactical analysts struggled to properly name. They eventually wrote it into the battle log as deliberate proximity override, which was a clinical description of something that had in practice made several of his officers physically uncomfortable to watch. When a human vessel was too damaged to continue effective ranged combat, its crew did not eject or surrender. They pointed the ship at the nearest Varn vessel and pushed their drives to maximum, not to destroy themselves in an explosion. The Dominion shields handled explosions. The humans knew this. What the humans did was ram their damaged vessels into Varn ships at high velocity, using their own hull as a kinetic weapon. And then, and this was the part that had produced the deliberate proximity override classification, because no one on Vorkin's staff wanted to simply write down what it actually was, they depressurized their interior compartments and vented their remaining crew through the breached holes into space, where the Varn ships, now dealing with a sudden hull contact and the structural aftershock of a multi-thousand-ton mass impact, had their shields momentarily destabilized, and where other human ships positioned at pre-calculated angles had been waiting for exactly that destabilization window. The sequence played out in seconds. Damaged human ship uses its last maneuver to close distance with a Varn Vessel impact, shield disruption. The human ship's crew does not survive. 3 or 4 human ships at distance. Fire through the disrupted shield window. Before it restabilizes. Vorkin had lost 9 ships this way in the span of 90 minutes. They are sacrificing themselves. Deliberately, his first officer Ashan said, not as an accusation, as a fact. That needed to be stated because acknowledging it was the first step toward accounting for it tactically. I know, Vorkin said. Our models don't. I know, Vorkin said again. He looked at his display. He was adapting. He was keeping his damaged vessels further back now to minimize the windows for this tactic, keeping his ships in tighter mutual shield support configuration so that the destabilization windows were covered by adjacent ships. He was adapting, and it was working. The problem was that every time he adapted, the humans adapted back. Commander Alana Reyes brought her squadron around the moon's far side at the beginning of the 15th hour. She had 14 ships left out of the 17 she had started with. The Mumbai had taken a beam hit that had destroyed its forward drive section and was running on residual momentum. The Lagos had lost 3 of its 4 weapon systems and was fighting with the one remaining, which its weapons crew had reportedly named Carlos, and retreating with more affection than was probably standard. The Sao Paulo itself had hull damage along the port side that was leaking atmosphere at a rate that Alana was choosing to classify as manageable. She had trained her crew for 6 years. She had been with this program for 11. She had not been born into it the way some of the younger crew members had been. She had been recruited at 32 after a career in the Brazilian naval service. After a quiet background check, she hadn't understood at the time, after a meeting at a room with no name on the door where a very calm woman had explained to her what was coming and what was being built to meet it. She had said yes immediately. She had never for wondered if that had been the right decision. Her squadron came around the southern orbital axis of the moon in a tight formation, tight enough to look like one large object on the Varn's long-range sensors if they weren't looking closely, which they weren't, because their full attention was focused on the primary engagement at the northern orbital plane. Alana looked at her tactical feed. She could see Mubarak's main force pressing hard on the Varn center. She could see the Varn formation being gradually compressed as the human fleet's numerical advantage and willingness to take losses pushed them back toward the higher orbital zones. She could also see the window. There was a gap between the Varn's eastern flank and their secondary reserve formation, a gap that existed because Vorkin had pulled his reserve inward to reinforce the center, which was the right decision, given the pressure on the center, but which had opened a corridor that led directly toward the rear of his command formation. All ships, Alana said, we are going through that gap, weapons free. Our priority target is the command formation at the back of their fleet. If we can get Mubarak's people a clear run at Vorkin's flagship, we win this engagement today instead of tomorrow. She paused. Keep your shields up, keep talking to each other. If you lose propulsion, you tell me immediately. Another pause. Let's go. The Sao Paulo leapt forward. Mubarak saw Rey's squadron move and felt something that was close to gratitude. He had planned for this. He had put Rey's in that position specifically because he trusted her read of the Tactical situation more than he trusted. A preset order. There was no way to time a flanking move. Through a gap from 30 minutes away. You needed someone on the ground who could see the moment and go. She had seen it, she had gone. Push the center, he told his tactical officer. All main formation elements forward. Full advance, we are not giving Vorkin time to close that gap. On his display, the main formation surged. The Varn center, already under pressure, found itself hit from two directions. Simultaneously. From the front by Mubarak's main force, and from the southeast by Ray's squadron. Cutting through the gap. The formation didn't break, but it compressed, and in compressing it, created overlapping shield geometries that interfered with the ship's own weapon systems. The Dominion was a precise civilization. Precision required space. Humans had just taken their space away. Rays lost 2 ships going through the gap. The Durban took a full beam hit at close range and came apart. She saw it on her display and kept moving. The Karachi had its navigation system destroyed and was running on manual. Maneuvering alone, she told its commander to fall back and cover the gap against closure, and he said he would. She arrived at the rear of the Varn formation with 11 ships. Vorkin's flagship, the Absolute Dominion, easily identifiable by its size and its central position in the command cluster, was in front of her, protected by 8 escort vessels, but its rear shields were carrying less than full power because it was oriented toward the main engagement. She had maybe 90 seconds before Vorkin realized what was behind him. Target the flagship's drive section, she said. I want it unable to maneuver. Not destroyed, we want it intact. All ships coordinated fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 11 ships opened fire at once. The Absolute Dominion shuddered. Its rear shields absorbed most of it, but not all. 2 of the drive nodes on its lower hull were destroyed by weapons fire that slipped through an overloaded shield seam. The flagship lost 20% of its maneuver capacity. The escort vessels turned to respond. The Sao Paulo took a beam hit on its damaged port side. The hull breach that Alana had been classifying as manageable became immediately less manageable. Alarms went off along half the bridge. Consoles. Damage report, she said. Hull breaches venting, decks 4 through 6, her damage officer said. Emergency. Seals are. Another hit, starboard this time. The lights on the bridge went to emergency. Red. Alana, her first officer, said he never used her first name on the bridge. The seals aren't holding, we need to. I need 60 more seconds, she said. Keep firing. Mubarak received the damage report from Ray's squadron as he was watching the main engagement beginning to tip. Genuinely, measurably, irreversibly in the human fleet's favor. Then his signals officer turned from her console. Admiral, we have intercepted a Dominion. Emergency communication, priority 1. Sector command level, she looked at him. They've called for reinforcement. A second fleet, sector command has acknowledged estimated arrival. She checked the numbers twice. 72 hours. 72 hours. Mubarak looked at his tactical display. His fleet had been in engagement for 15 hours. He had lost 312 ships. His people were tired, his vessels were damaged, and his enemy was hurt but not broken. And in 72 hours, a second Vorn fleet would arrive. He did not allow himself to think about what a second fleet looked like. He already knew the Dominion Sector Command could mobilize between 800 and 1,200 vessels on a priority response request. How long can we maintain this engagement pace? He asked his tactical officer. The officer was quiet for a moment, running the numbers. At current attrition rates, 36 to 40 hours of effective combat capacity. 36 to 40 hours. He needed to end this in 36 hours, with enough fleet remaining to present a credible deterrent to the reinforcement fleet when it arrived. He looked at the absolute Dominion on his display, partially disabled, surrounded but fighting. Vorkin was still in command, still adapting, still directing a fleet that was losing but had not lost. To end this engagement, he needed that ship. He needed Vorkin. "Get me Commander Reyes," he said. Reyes answered immediately. Her bridge was loud behind her, the sound of damage. "Control. I see the flagship," she said before Mubarak could speak. "I've been working on it. Her drives are partially disabled. If you can get me 2 more squadrons from the main formation, I can." "Ilana," Mubarak said. She stopped. "What's your ship status?" A pause. "Manageable. Honestly." A longer pause. "We can fight for another 6 hours before the hull integrity becomes a hard problem. Pull back your squadron to the rally point," Mubarak said. "You've done your job. You open the gap. I'll send fresh ships through it." "I can't." "You've done your job," Mubarak said. "That's not criticism. That's the most important thing I will say to you today." He held the channel open for a second. "Well done, Commander." He cut the channel. He turned to his tactical officer. "I need 6 squadrons from the northern formation. Send them through Reyes' gap. Target the flagship and its escort cluster. I want them pushing Vorkin toward the central engagement zone. I want him surrounded, not cornered. Cornered enemy fights harder. And encircled one has a decision to make." "Yes, Admiral." He looked at the display, at the battle that had been building for 31 years, at the ships and the people, and the terrible, extraordinary cost of what they were doing. At the 64 hours they had left before the Second Fleet arrived. "It ends today," he said quietly. He was not certain he believed it yet, but he needed to, so he said it. On the display, 6 squadrons turned toward the flagship. They moved. The 6 squadrons hit Vorkin's escort cluster from 3 directions at once. 2 of the escort vessels went down in the first exchange. A third lost its weapon systems and drifted. The remaining 5 pulled into a tight defensive formation around the absolute Dominion. And for 20 minutes they held, genuinely held, absorbing hit after hit, giving back as good as they were getting, because Varn escort crews were not poorly trained, and they understood what it meant to let a command ship fall. But there were too many human ships, pressing from too many angles. By the 18th hour of the engagement, the absolute Dominion was alone. Its shields were at 40%, its drive capacity was at 30%. It had lost half its weapon systems, but the remaining half were still firing, still accurate, still doing damage to the ships pushing it back toward the center of the battle. Vorkin was good, even now, even here. Encircled and damaged, he was still the best combat commander in the Dominion's regional fleet, and he was fighting like it. But there were no more ships to send. His fleet was broken, not destroyed. There were still hundreds of Varn vessels fighting across the engagement zone, but broken in the operational sense. No longer a coordinated force. Individual ships fighting their own local engagements, not connected to a broader strategy, because the broader strategy had been dismantled ship by ship over 18 hours of fighting the way the humans fought. Mubarak watched the flagship's shield readings on his display and made the decision. Boarding action, he said. Prepare the assault teams. Human boarding parties had been part of the first Armada's training program from the beginning. Not because anyone had been certain it would come to this, but because Mubarak had insisted on it 15 years earlier, when the program's tactical planning division had been running scenario models, most of the scenarios that ended in decisive human victory, not just military victory, but strategic, lasting message-sending victory, involved taking an enemy command ship intact with its admiral inside. The planning division had asked him how he intended to breach Varn hull plating. He had said, the same way we breach everything, we find the weak point and we hit it until it opens. The assault teams trained in pressurized corridors with hard suits and close quarters weapons built specifically for confined space combat. They trained against mock-ups of Vorn ship layouts built from every piece of intelligence human operatives had gathered over 3 decades. They trained in the dark because Vorn ships had different light frequencies than human ships. They trained in noise and smoke and zero gravity and every other condition someone could think to throw at them. They were ready. The absolute Dominion's shields flickered to 32% and held there. Mubarak gave the order. 3 assault shuttles launched from the nearest human vessels, fast, small, built low enough to the electromagnetic spectrum that Vorn point defense systems had trouble targeting them cleanly. 2 of them made it to the flagship's hull. 1 was destroyed on approach. The surviving 2 attached breach charges and burned through the outer hull in 40 seconds. Inside the absolute Dominion, the alarms were a continuous layered sound that Vorkin had stopped consciously processing 20 minutes ago. He registered it the way he registered, breathing as background as the context of the moment. He was standing at his command console. His first officer, Ashan, was beside him. The bridge was operating at reduced capacity, half the console's dark. Emergency lighting casting everything in a flat red glow. Through the forward viewing panels, he could see the human fleet surrounding his ship at close range, near enough that he could make out individual hull details on the vessels pressing in on him. He had already sent the message to his crew, fight deck to deck. It was not a message he had ever sent before. He had never been boarded. No ship in the Dominion fleet had been boarded in his lifetime. Boarding actions were a primitive tactic, a close and ugly way of fighting that civilizations graduated away from as their weapons technology improved. The Dominion had not needed to board an enemy vessel in 3 centuries. The humans apparently had not received that memo. He heard the breach 2 decks below. He heard the hard suits in the corridors, a distinctive sound, the weight of armored humans moving fast in a pressurized environment, a sound that none of his crew had been trained to process because none of them had trained for this. He heard fighting. He thought about what to do. He had the option of destroying his own ship. Every Dominion command vessel carried a coordination mechanism for exactly this scenario to prevent capture of classified hardware and information. He had the authorization. He had the code. He stood there for a long moment. Then he thought about the humans he had been watching for 18 hours. He thought about the ships they had rammed into his fleet. He thought about the Gap raid squadron had driven through and the 6 hours of fighting it had taken to close it and the cost on both sides of those 6 hours. He thought about the 72 hours until his reinforcement fleet arrived. He thought about what would happen when that reinforcement fleet arrived, if Mubarax's fleet was still here and still intact and still willing to fight the way it had been fighting. He thought they will come back. Whatever happened here today, the humans would come back from it. That was what the last 18 hours had taught him. Not that they were unbeatable, not that the Dominion could not ultimately overwhelm them with sufficient force, but that they would come back again and again and again with whatever they had left from whatever direction presented itself, until the last one of them was gone. They would come back because that was what they were. That was the fundamental characteristic of this species that no pre-invasion survey had ever measured, because no pre-invasion survey had ever needed to measure it. They did not stop. He could detonate the core. He could kill everyone on the ship, his crew and the humans boarding it. He could deny them the symbolic prize of the command vessel, and then the reinforcement fleet would arrive in 72 hours and it would find Mubarax's fleet waiting for it, and they would fight again, and the humans would take more casualties, and the Dominion would take more casualties, and eventually the weight of Dominion numbers might be enough. Or it wouldn't, because they did not stop. He put his hand down from the detonation panel. "Ashan," he said. "Admiral, tell our people to cease fighting. Open the bridge doors." Ashan stared at him. "Admiral." "Do it," Vorkin said, "and open a channel to the human fleet, all frequencies." The bridge doors opened. The first human through them was wearing a hard suit with no markings except a flag painted on the left shoulder. A flag Vorkin's translation system identified as the flag of a country called Nigeria. The soldier and Vorkin could see through the helmet visor that the soldier was a woman, young, with a cut above her eye from something that had happened in the corridor. Fighting came through the door with her weapon raised and swept the room with the thoroughness of someone who had trained for this moment many times. She was followed by 4 more soldiers, then a 6th figure taller, moving with a particular careful deliberateness of someone who was used to rooms going quiet when they entered. Admiral Yusuf Mubarak took off his helmet. He looked around the bridge. He looked at the damage, at the red emergency lighting, at the console readouts showing the state of the battle outside, at the Varn crew, hands visible still, at Vorkin standing at the center of it, all straight-backed, still composed, with the particular kind of dignity that belongs to someone who has made a decision they intend to carry without flinching. Mubarak stopped a few meters away from him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. "Admiral Vorkin," Mubarak said. "Admiral Mubarak," Vorkin said. A pause. "I have opened a channel to my fleet," Vorkin said. "They have been instructed to cease engagement. I am prepared to formally withdraw from the system. He paused. I want to know one thing. Ask it, Mubarak said. We surveyed this system 14 months ago. Vorkin said. We found nothing. We found a Class 4 civilization with a primitive military and no capacity for the fleet we encountered today. He looked at Mubarak with his pale eyes. How long have you been building? 31 years, Mubarak said. Vorkin took that in. You built all of this, he said, in 31 years, knowing we were coming. Knowing someone like you was coming. Mubarak said, we didn't know your name. We knew the shape of the problem. And your people, Vorkin said, they were never told. 8 billion people on that planet below us, and they didn't know their government had been building a war fleet for 3 decades. No, Mubarak said. Wasn't that a deception? The Mubarak considered this seriously. We were protecting the secret. One leak would have changed the math badly enough that we might not be having this conversation. He paused. They know now. Vorkin was quiet for a moment. My reinforcement fleet arrives in 69 hours, he said. I know, Mubarak said. They will have the engagement data. They will come with a larger force and better preparation. I know that too. Then you understand that this is not over. Mubarak looked at him steadily. No, this engagement is over. Whether the larger conflict is over depends on what your reinforcement fleet's commander decides when they arrive and see what's waiting for them. He paused. I'd like to believe that a species as old and as experienced as the Varn Dominion is capable of recognizing a situation and making a rational decision about whether to continue it. Vorkin looked at him for a long moment. And if they are not, then we fight again, Mubarak said. Simply without drama, and we keep fighting until someone makes a rational decision. Vorkin was quiet. Outside the viewports, the guns had gone silent. The engagement zone that had been lit with weapons fire for 19 hours had gone dark. Human ships and the surviving Varn vessels floated in the same space still, the way debris floats after a storm. I will recommend withdrawal, Vorkin said. At last, to my fleet, to Sector Command. To the reinforcement fleet when it arrives. He paused. I cannot guarantee they will follow my recommendation. I understand, Mubarak said. That's all. I'm asking your honest recommendation. He extended his hand. Vorkin looked at the gesture. He knew what it meant. The translation system had flagged it as a human gesture of formal agreement and mutual respect, typically involving physical contact. With the open hand, he reached out and took it. They shook hands in the red emergency lighting of a broken bridge on a ship that had come to take a world and found something it had not prepared for. The formal ceasefire was transmitted across the engagement zone within the hour. The Varn fleet began its withdrawal from Earth orbit 18 hours later after the logistical details of the disengagement had been worked through. They moved in careful formation, damaged ships fewer than they had arrived with, taking their dead with them the way the Dominion protocol required. They left. The sky above Earth was clear for the first time in 4 days. Armada was in the bunker when the last Varn ship cleared the outer edge of the solar system. She watched it on the sensor feed. She watched the signal dot blink and fade as the ship crossed into FTL. Then she sat in the quiet and let it settle over her. Around her the council was talking, not arguing for once, just talking the way people talk when something large has just ended and the full shape of it hasn't arrived yet, but everyone can feel it coming. Chen Hong sat beside her. He had been sitting beside her for most of the last 4 days. It worked, he said. This part worked, she said. We still have 66 hours. And if the reinforcement fleet doesn't turn around. She looked at the empty sensor feed, where the last Varn ship had been. Then, we trust Mubarak, she said, same as we always have. Mubarak sent the message to the Galaxy 3 days later. Not to the Varn Dominion specifically. To everyone, to every civilization. Within range of a standard long frequency broadcast, which was the majority of the inhabited galaxy, within a few hundred light years. It was not long. He had written 7 drafts of it before settling on the final version. The first 6 had been too long, too many words explaining things that the facts explained better on their own. The final version said this: to any civilization receiving this transmission, my name is Yusuf Mubarak. I'm an admiral of the Earth Strategic Fleet First Armada, representing the planet Earth and its 8 billion people. 4 days ago, a fleet of 600 Varn Dominion warships entered our solar system and demanded our surrender. We refused. We engaged their fleet and disabled their command vessel. Their fleet has withdrawn from our system. We are not a warlike species. We do not seek territory. We do not seek conflict. We built this fleet because something was coming for us, and we chose to be ready. We are always ready. Earth is not available. That is all. The message was attached to the full sensor record of the engagement, every minute of it, every weapons exchange, every formation shift, every ship lost. On both sides, every decision made. Anyone who wanted to understand what had happened could watch it from beginning to end and draw their own conclusions. The message traveled at the speed of light in all directions, carrying 19 hours of battle data and 11 words that would reach in time every inhabited system within broadcast range, 412 light-years away, in the outer orbital station of a system whose name translated roughly as the collective governance of the seventh sun. A data officer named Parith pulled the incoming broadcast from the long frequency queue and ran it through the translation matrix. He read the header. He flagged it for his supervisor. His supervisor read it. They sat together in the small station monitoring room for several minutes, not speaking. Then the supervisor brought up the expansion projection maps on the secondary display, the charts that showed the seventh sun's planned territorial growth trajectory over the next 100 years. One of the corridors on that chart passed through a sector that contained, among other minor systems, a small yellow star with 8 planets, the third of which was a green-blue world with large surface oceans. The supervisor looked at that corridor for a long time. Then she highlighted it on the chart. She flagged it with a single notation: do not approach. She saved the file. She closed the display. She went back to her other work. The message kept traveling outward into the dark in all directions, getting smaller and fainter with distance, but never quite stopping. The way light never quite stops, just grows too faint to measure, carrying its 11 words across the years. We are always ready. Earth is not available. In the solar system it had come from, on the planet it was about 8 billion. People looked up at their own sky, clear. Now quiet now, belonging to them again. And most of them knew none of the details and all of the feeling. They were still here. That was enough. That was for now everything.